I am so excited because I have been looking all over the world to find a certain person for you to experience from day one here at RISD. Someone who speaks the language of that terrible word, money. Ooh, money, finances. In the lovely language, the language of integrity, the language of art. To find someone was kind of hard. I would look in Harvard Business School, all these business people. They could all speak business and a little bit of art. But no one out there spoke the language of art first, until I had the chance encounter through different people in the network to find Amy. Now, Amy is the person that wrote Museum Legs, the book that was sent to you electronically. A book that when I read, I realized, oh wait, this is a book about art history and museums. You visit our fine museum already, but museums, art history, but it's also about finances, labor law, world economics, all kinds of real-world issues that are impacting the world all over the place that will affect your lives as you leave RISD. But she speaks from the language of art. And when you think about it, this is a language missing today. The language today of art is art needs help. You know, art needs help. You know, like my kids have this benefit every year. It's called the Walk for the Arts. You walk around school, you raise money for painting supplies. And this always bugged me, you know, I didn't know why. And I was talking to Jesse, the provost, about this one day, and I said, Jesse, why does this bother me? And Jesse said, well, it makes art sound like some kind of disease that needs help, that needs support. Art is no such thing. Art is a way of thinking, and it has the potential to change how the world operates. And I believe that that's the critical thinking, critical making you learn here, the ability to understand critique at the level that no other people out there understand except the RISD way, can make a difference. But how do you do that? Is there a roadmap? Well, I love the fact that Amy has this kind of background. She's a mixed up person. Sorry, a good way. I'm mixed up too. She has a mixture of fine arts, an MFA, and also an MBA, business background as well. And she has worked at some of the top museums in the world, MoMA, Tate, Guggenheim, and also worked in hedge funds, startups. And also, I want to note that she has worked as a project manager in the studio of one of our most famous alums, Jenny Holzer. And also, this isn't just the last time you'll see Amy. She'll be teaching a class during winter session and also spring semester, so I hope you avail yourself of that opportunity. I am so proud and honored to have her here on RISD campus to greet all of you. Amy, come on up.
That was as close as I'm going to get to going on The Price is Right, so the come on up. So I really appreciate that. Before I get started in my talk, I just wanted to pause for a moment and say thanks, especially to John for inviting me into the conversation here, and to Jesse for stewarding my relationship to a lot of people. My list is very long, but Raj has particularly taken me under his wing, Raj Balani, who's in charge of a lot of your early time here and making this orientation happen, and Sarah Gans-Blythe, with whom I've been working at the museum. And the list goes on. I've been working with Patty and Deborah on the course, and with Brian on another course, and so on and so forth. And I don't want to leave anyone like Mara out as well. But I just want to say I'm really genuinely grateful to be here. I appreciate your time in reading Museum Legs and also in coming to hear what I have to say. And I hope that in the next few minutes I'll say something that maybe hits a couple of the questions that you have early in your time at one of the great art schools in the world. So on that note, I'm going to talk in general about Museum Legs and the creative life of museums and the public life of art. But really I'm going to talk about 5 different things. So since you've done me the kindness of reading the book, I'd like to go through a little bit more about that story in particular, and then I want to connect it to the sort of BFA, MBA thinking, this connection of art and economics. And then that'll link into talking about a much broader definition of art. And then what I call values is really talking about some ideas for your time here at RISD. And then we're going to launch into an actual project across the street at the museum. So when I started writing this book, it was 2001, and two different things were happening that I had a hard time reconciling. One was are you raising your hand? Sorry. One was the incredible expansion of art museums by square footage, and the other was that every time I took my own friends to museums, this is what we looked like. So there was an argument for numbers on the one hand, that they needed more space to show works of art, but stories on the other, that real people in the spaces were feeling a little bit fatigued and overwhelmed. And I was curious why that was happening. So the first thing I learned is that it's been happening for a very long time. There's a wonderful man named Benjamin Ives Gilman who wrote a book in 1918 called Museum Ideals of Purpose and Method. He devotes an entire chapter to wicker stools he thinks will prevent fatigue, and he also takes all these photos of men looking at art that's hung at the wrong height. And he made an observation, if you read the letter I sent on the blog, that museums are one of the few places in modern life where you're asked to stand to concentrate and to sit to rest. So cinema, lecture halls, offices are always the opposite. It's a great architectural design problem of museums. So the other thing that I learned straight away was that museums were incredibly creative in their early histories. So you can think of museums as art projects themselves. The Museum of Modern Art was founded in 1929 by 3 women who met by accident on a trip to Egypt and on the boat back, and they opened the doors a mere 10 days after the stock market crash of 1929. They hired a man named Alfred Barr to be the first director. He was 27 when they found him teaching at Wellesley College, and he really fashioned the institution from scratch. He set up the multi-departmental plan according to the syllabus of his class, and he would do things like suggest casually to someone that maybe the institution could have a photography show. The person would realize they were being tasked with doing it. They would have the show, and then they would be the first director of the Department of Photography. That same man used to develop all of the installation shots in the men's room of the townhouse where they operated. It was really a startup. He was so visionary that in the early 1940s, they stone cold fired him. They were expecting him to be more of a scholar and less of a professional manager. And he was so loyal to the institution, he stayed, and eventually they came to recognize his contribution. But it brings up a trend that happens in museums and often in the life of artists and of creative institutions everywhere, which is that something starts as a creative project, it grows to a public scale, and then as if a ball rolling down a hill, there's an inertia toward commercialization. And the tricky, scary, vulnerable thing to do is to be at a public scale and to constantly go back to the creative phase and to reinvent. So let me give you a couple of examples. MoMA had a heyday as a public institution in the 1950s. In the late 50s, the building caught on fire, and while the trustees were in standard issue fire brigade helmets rescuing artworks, members of the public gathered outside, and unsolicitedly, people would walk across the street and leave $1 or $5 on the counter and then walk away. To me, that's a sense of public ownership, of people feeling that the museum belongs to them and that they have a place there. The museum reopened more recently in a beautiful new space with a $20 admissions charge. So the market bears that in many ways, but it also fundamentally changes the experience of going to the museum, and to me is a form of commercialization, a form of taking the experience of visiting a museum and turning it into an economic transaction. So these are obviously tricky questions, how art and economics fit together, because the truth is, we all live in the midst of a market economy. MoMA is an institution that has to make a livelihood, but how do they decide to do that kind of relative to their mission? So I just want to go through and talk a little bit in general terms about art and economics and circle back to museums later on. So the first thing a lot of people think of when they think of these two topics together is the value of works of art. I would say the Mona Lisa is one of the most valuable paintings in the world. It also happens that the Mona Lisa has not changed hands since the French Revolution, so it has no price. The only way that you can really know its value, apart from the throngs of tourists, is the fact that it was sunk into concrete and put behind bulletproof glass in the year that I was born. Another way that people think about art and economics, and especially people who, like all of you and like myself, are practicing artists, is that it's scary and it feels like a form of selling out. This is an early work by Jeff Koons. Some of you might know it. He famously worked as a stockbroker to pay for this and subsequently developed a studio practice that involved hiring many assistants and working at a factory scale. So let me just be clear, I'm not making a commentary one way or another on Jeff Koons' practice. I'm just bringing it up to make a more general point, which is that if you take one thing away from this talk, take away the idea that as an artist, learning economics is not a form of selling out. It's a form of trusting yourself to make choices, of knowing enough to be able to decide when economics applies and when it doesn't. And that's especially tricky for museum managers who have to figure out when they can afford to pay money or when they can afford, essentially, in the case of admissions charges, to be generous. So I want to talk a little bit about how economics kind of directly affects artists. I've been lucky with Raj to travel around and meet some RISD alums who live locally, and this is Kise, which is a woodworking studio run by this really nice guy named Asher Dunn. They work on a subscription model where people can pay to use the space and some very expensive equipment, and then Asher also has his own furniture line. And talking to Asher about it, I'll go back. Talking to Asher about it, he said two things about the economic life of having that space. One was that he was very clear with himself about his own risk tolerance, and he did not invest money that he didn't have to lose. Even if he was taking out debt in a certain situation, he was very, very clear about his own comfort level. And the other thing was that he really viewed economics in terms of its ability to let him do what he wanted to do, the degree of freedom it could give him. This is just another example of a space. In Asher's case, they're managing a space to do creative work, and here the space itself is the creative work. This is also in Providence. It's an office block made out of disused railroad cars. This is a friend of mine, Caroline Woolard. Her mother, Nancy Austin, actually teaches sometimes at RISD. Caroline does a number of things. She runs a barter economy school. She also runs an enormous commercial space that she subdivides into artist studios for her friends. And she has real economic questions in running it, to use John's word, with integrity. She has to ask whether to pay herself, whether to pay rent herself, and fundamentally how to deal with the lease that was signed years before the housing market crash. And they're all real economic questions, and they're all in service of people getting to make these wonderful, works of art that may have an economic life and may not. So the truth about economics, and one of the reasons it rightfully makes people stand back a bit in creative fields, is that it's based on a very tight set of assumptions. Profit maximization for firms, this idea that firms exist to make the most money possible. Utility maximization for people, that you and I are always constantly interested in increasing our satisfaction, however that's defined. A notion of efficiency, that the most efficient way is always the best, and a sense that we're always in competition with one another. So you can see some of the limitations of these assumptions. We live in a time of systems thinking where people are very aware of the environment and of sustainability. So profit maximization is sometimes at odds with that because it involves taking from one area of the economy to support another, or things like pollution that don't happen to be correctly priced, where economics is a neutral tool that sometimes is used in a not neutral way. Utility maximization, there are lots of things that people want besides consumption, and those can be balance or peace of mind or self-actualization or simply an ability to make your own work. efficiency, a lot of creative breakthroughs happen in very inefficient ways. And they're also unpredictable, so not only is it inefficient, but you can't even know how much time it's going to take you. And finally, competition, and this is being recognized within the business world, but cooperation is hugely important. Even from a profit-maximizing standpoint, there's a book called Co-opetition about the importance of increasing the size of the pie before you divide it up. So Coke and Pepsi compete with each other, but in total, more people drink soft drinks than they would otherwise. The Milk Board is a similar story with more kind of benign, less competitive undertones. But even in the arts, Damien Hirst and the young British artists, part of why they became famous is that they had group shows, which helped them reach critical mass so that people would see all the individual artists' work because they knew that they were going to a bigger event. So the message here is that a lot of the concepts in economic are actually poetic in their nature. They're these fundamental attempts to understand what motivates people, how people choose to live in relation to one another. They're based on things like desire, want, need, and it's important to kind of keep those things in mind because it helps economics recede a little bit as a tool and as a means of thinking through problems, not as a kind of consuming environment over which we don't have control. So I guess my message is that if you understand it well, you can see its limitations and its uses. So there'll be times when economics helps you to realize your work or to maintain the ecosystem of your life or to amplify your projects and to reach 1 million people instead of 100 people. And there'll be other times where you think, you know, I could make more money here and I'm not going to because there's something else that's at stake that's more important. So a small personal example of that, when I was doing my MFA, through a series of accidents, I made a set of drawings of fake art projects about art museums, and then experimented with screen printing them so that they would be much larger. The one that I screen printed first was called Museum Director Action Heroes, and I left it to dry, and the technician was running late. An art history professor came and saw it, and the next thing I knew, I got an email that his wife, who was the interim director of prints and drawings at the British Museum, wanted to buy it for a friend as a personal Christmas present, and her friend was the director of the British Museum. So you can imagine that I literally, with one of the first prints I'd ever made, like tucked it under my arm and took it over to the British Museum to this prints expert. And it was a wonderful kind of serendipitous story, and it happened at a time that I was particularly slogging away in the studio. And when I talked to some of my classmates, their first question was, how much did you sell it for? I hope you really got paid money to make that. And I was thinking to myself, you know, there's a time and a place to accept that you need to be paid a lot for your art and that payment shows the value of the work, or you need to be paid a lot for your art because that payment importantly supports your life. But there's also a time and a place where the fact of the series of events almost becomes part of the art project itself, and you're lucky to be able to make that choice. And so in that case, I'm not sure I got it right at the time, but it helped me think through the problem a little bit later. This is an example of creative thinking of an artistic variety in an economic setting. This is a company called Ocean Power Technology that takes yo-yo buoys. They attach a buoy via a yo-yo mechanism to a turbine on the floor of the ocean. And this is sort of the flip side economic question, which is that you may be able to use economics within your artistic practice, but as John's saying, you may also be able to use your artistic practice to create change in the world in a lot of different areas. You may decide to be an entrepreneur. You may decide to be in public office. You may run a large or small corporation, or you may just run your own life in that way. But you have a chance to take these kinds of projects that may have no economic life at first, even like an Airbnb, and be compelled forward by them and ultimately have them be economically successful because you are willing to take non-economic risks at the outset. It's animated, that's the yo-yo. And you also may, who knows, that's Lloyd Blankfein on the right, on the left. your right. He's the head of Goldman Sachs, and that's Jamie Dimon, the head of JP Morgan. There are a lot of people who have animosity toward these two men right now. You get to understand economics well enough, not only to kind of have compassion for their situation, but to apply creative problem solving to it, to get under the surface of these questions that we all face as a society and to try to push them forward in a meaningful way. And also to keep people like this somewhat more accountable through a kind of informed watching of what they do. I'll also say, just as a second personal aside from the business rather than the art part of my life, when I went to work in a hedge fund, fairly directly out of art school, I shared an office with a woman who had an MFA in acting. So we were on the 40th floor of a 39-story building with no windows and an office that was famous for two reasons. It had the door to the emergency generator room for the whole building, and it was where the foosball table used to be, and it just so happened that the vice chairman of the firm had literally been the world foosball champion. And when she and I had this afternoon coffee clutch, what we would talk about was that it was sort of refreshing to work in finance because it was so obviously about money, it was really about people. If anyone had come in to invest and they had thought any of us was creepy, they would have immediately walked out the door. And they were coming there because they had seen performance numbers over a number of years. But the interactions people had were incredibly human. I would see people from England come over and talk to my boss, someone they'd known for years and years, and the first immediate question was always, is your family happy and well? And it's something to remember, because I think it can also happen on the art side that someone will pretend that it's really about people or art, but it's actually about money. And I think it's a helpful gear to be able to have clarity on those different pieces of interaction. And you may choose, for example, to have a day job and to sort the economic part of your life totally separately from your art at different periods of time, or you may choose for your art to be your participation in the economy, or something in between, or something else. But it's nice to know what those choices are as you're putting together those building blocks. So in talking about the sort of combination of art and economics, it's hard to do it without also talking about what art is, which is an immediately fraught question. But the definition that I like to use is adapted from Whitaker, and it's that a work of art is a new thing created in the world that changes the world to allow itself to exist. So there are many things that are organizations and businesses, entrepreneurial visions, governments, that would meet that definition. This is you can probably tell by now, a patent application picture of a Rubik's Cube. Most patent applications have drawings attached. And the three parts of the sort of first principles of this definition when you're applying it outside of the traditional arts are visual thinking, imagination, and creativity. So for visual thinking, we live in one of the most overwhelmingly visual ages of all time. There are also many, many areas of our lives that are governed by analytic visual thinking. It's amazing we have machines that can read this. We also have pathologists that can read slides under a microscope to see if someone has cancer. When you go to the airport, there's a person looking at the contents of your bag to vet it. Extremely visual. We also have imagination that happens far outside the visual arts. This is a man named Roger Bannister. He's the first person to run a mile in under 4 minutes. At the time he did it, 1954 in England, people thought it was physically impossible that a human being could not run that fast. And he did it, also with some help from his friends who paced him. He held the record for 45 days before people beat his effort. So I'd like to point out the cognitive difference between believing something is possible in a vacuum where it's never been done before and seeing that someone's done it and trying to best an effort. So this is a kind of open-ended creative process on the one hand, like imagining something, and a kind of benchmarking on the other. So as an aside, he was a neurologist at the time. He was doing his residency and he trained on his lunch break. So he was a sort of generalist with interests in many fields, and also his real training breakthrough happened when he took a break. He was training and training and training, and then they all went away to hike and came back. And we'll talk more about museums a little later on, but I think that museums can serve that function too if you ever need a break from your artistic working life. So creativity is sort of the application of imaginative thinking is a process, and it's a messy, often unmappable process. This is a picture on the far side of Whitfield Diffie. He is credited with inventing public-private key encryption. And the reason that I use his story is that he was not sitting down at a desk one day thinking, I'm going to figure this problem out. He had trained. He had a period of the development of skill, much like the development of drawing skill for artists, and a period of great circuitous discovery. This is the early 70s. He drove across country in a Datsun 210, happened to meet his wife on the trip, and ended up at Stanford, and he was house sitting for someone and taking care of their child. And he said that one day he walked into the kitchen to get a Coke, had a thought, I was thinking something, what was it? Almost lost it, then got it back and didn't lose it again. And that's the thought that makes possible most transactions on the internet, a notion that you can have a public and a private key at the same time. So skill is important, and doing the work is important, but there are parts of it that are very unpredictable. And again, back to this efficiency notion of economics, hard to map. So I think ultimately, if anything can be a work of art, your life is certainly that way. And the example here is Winston Churchill, who we know best as the savior of the free world and the prime minister during World War II. But in 1915, he left a position as the First Lord of the Admiralty, and he truly thought at the time that he would never go into public service again. And he picked up painting as a hobby. Now, I personally love that he painted with a cigar, because when I was in art school, that's literally the one thing that you were summarily kicked out for doing, was painting around solvents. Smoking around solvents. But he not only painted, but he wrote a book called Painting as a Pastime, where he said things like, do not turn the superior eye of critical passivity upon these efforts. Buy a paint box and have a try. And a lot of this is geared toward people who are hobbyists and not professional artists, but he's trying to point out to people this whole world of possibility that happens from taking up an artistic practice, and I think that's definitely true and something that people can do with their whole lives. So I just want to return to the topic of museums and tie a bow around some of these pieces to an extent. I've talked a lot in the book about museums as an insulated judiciary in matters of visual culture, that they have a public role, that they're slightly apart as institutions so that we trust them, and that trust allows us to cantilever our expansiveness toward new and confusing art. I've also talked about them as public in the sense of being like libraries for visual thinking and imagination, that you can go in and see things and they steward them for all of us. But what I want to talk about now is what they are to you as creative people. And when I think of the creative process, there are two perspectives people have on it: the perspective of the people who are doing it and the perspective of everyone else. And if you're doing it, it looks a little bit like this. You're totally in the weeds. And if you see it after the fact, it looks like this, where there's a map that's like, those are the weeds that you were in and you made it to the other side. So when you think of a Beatles song, obviously it was always going to be written, or To Kill a Mockingbird, of course she wrote that book, but in her life, she wrote that book after she went to law school, dropped out, moved to New York, and spent 6 years working as a reservations agent for Eastern Airlines. And even still, after she got a literary agent and her friends gave her for Christmas a year's salary to write the book, supposedly she threw the manuscript out the window twice in frustration. So you really, you're not on steady ground, you're swimming in a current, and you have to trust your own kind of navigational sensibility and focus on whatever the lighthouse is of what compels you forward. But it's hard to be reminded of that in an art museum, because not only can you see the weeds from a little further away, but it's in a gilded frame. So there's some values that people often attach to museums. This notion of appreciating art, which is covered a bit in Museum Legs, that appreciating art is a little bit like being in a cocktail party conversation where your only gambit is, oh, how fascinating, over and over and over again. It's tiring. And you know everything is a masterpiece, so you might be doing the same kind of thinking as Roger Bannister's competitors, where you're trying to best an effort or get up to a level. And you know everything is historically important. And this is something I really thought about a couple of weeks ago in the car, because and you can practice this too if you're in a store or a car where you don't have total control over the music. I was listening to this station and a Black Sabbath song came on, and I was thinking to myself, you know, this is actually pretty good. This is not music I would normally have affinity toward. It's, you know, the Victorian lapdog portrait or the French decorative furniture or whatever it is that I have to push myself to appreciate sometimes in actual museums. But what was fun was to think about it in terms of this sort of blank canvas moment of how they actually came to make that sound in the first place and what it was they were trying to do. And in museums, you can have that thought against this sort of vast swath of history, that there's such a buildup over time, and you can get overwhelmed thinking about that. But you can, in the sort of Black Sabbath way, you can look at that one moment and look at all the people who are doing just that one thing and practice imagining how something was constructed from scratch. So these are the values that I would encourage in terms of museums. And one is curiosity and open-ended looking. That when you go to a museum as an artist, you're there a little bit as a sleuth, and you're trying to have a conversation with the work. So a conversation is not you saying something and then thinking about what you want to say in response to what the other person is saying. It's like you don't know where you're going at the beginning. You're listening to someone and you're building on what they're saying. And a museum hopefully gives you a chance to be surprised by what happens and to be changed in some way by it. And as I've said about Black Sabbath, you can look at all these paintings and you can look at what they show and you can think about them historically. And as artists, you can also mentally Photoshop them back to the blank canvas moment and think about why they got to where they were. You can think about technically how they were painted and why someone followed that thought process. And that may kind of feed in more to your own kind of personal work. So those are the kind of museum value ideas, and these are a few I want to add just at a personal level that as artists, I think these are kind of three of the best things that you have at your disposal, and as people too, I should say, and designers. This is a picture from a Backstreet Boys concert that I went to with my office, with my boss, who was one of my kind introductions to John Maeda. We had a lot of interns over the summer, and he thought this would be a hilarious send-off. So the first thing you'll notice about this picture is that most of those people are holding up camera phones to record the concert. I'm not sure they're actually watching it. And especially in an age of technology where there's so much distraction to be had, actually paying attention is one of the great gifts and powers that you have. Deciding what it is you really want to track in the present moment and what you're able to give yourself over to being present for. Related to that is a notion of participation. Fundamentally being game, thinking, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm going to show up. When we first got to the concert, we were standing way over there by the bar in the back, very aware of being at the fringe of the event. And then a little later, I got dragged by some of our interns up into the fray. And you're in there and you're thinking, I don't know if I have great dance moves in the workplace, and this is crazy, and I don't even know any of their songs, and they sang them at their best many years ago. But it was so fun. And just the sheer fact of participating, I think, can be transformative, and not just a kind of practice, a way of kind of being open-hearted toward what experience is in front of you. And generosity is related to these two, because these are both a form of kind of giving your attention and time to something. When I was in art school, the pithy Scottish painter who ran the program used to say things like, all good artists are generous. And I think there's a little bit of truth to that, because you're often being asked to give something over before you get something back. You're exploring uncharted territory, you're putting something out there, and I think it's an important gear to have and an ability to do that. And I think you also have to be very generous with yourselves and with your peers, because as in the picture of the weeds earlier, the state of being an artist, and I do mean that in a very general sense to include people who are designing and making work in any field, you have to trust yourself exactly at that point of vulnerability where you truly have no idea where you're going and you don't know if the work is good or not. And you have to trust your ability to play through that. And then if you show up as presently as you can, with as much attention and kind of being game as you can muster, that good will come of it. And that you also have a great support of each other and the people around you when you do that. So these are some of our interns. This is the one who has the excellent dance moves and dragged everyone. And I just want to seg into the museum stuff by saying that so much of this, the kind of underlying theme is that it's really about people, about the formation of yourself as a person, which you're fortunate to be in a wonderful place to do or to continue to do, and also about other people around you and your ability to collaborate with them and have conversation with them and fundamentally learn from them. Here we have Raj and Asher at Kisei. I seem to have caught them mid-laugh, so it looks a little diabolical, but we had a great time. Asher is carrying one of his chair prototypes. Here's Asher's team. Like, fundamentally, he works with a group of people, and there's a lot of economics and art and everything else, but there's a real team of people and a real camaraderie. And then we have this is my kind of attempt, just thinking through this talk, to participate in what it is that you all do. So I thought I would start to draw a bicycle. I had that moment where I was like, oh no, this is going badly, and I should go get lunch. I might make it worse. I've been on a writing residency, and there's a RISD alum on the program, and I told him I was trying to draw a bicycle and explained that the wheels were not in perspective, and he's like, you're not getting in. But it was a great process for me because I've been writing for a number of years, and I'm rusty at drawing, and it's even more so than getting in the middle of a Backstreet Boys concert, a form of showing up. So here's the drawing as I finished it, and this is the drawing as I had it printed to hand out to you as a part one of our art project at the museum. So I have a bunch of these. I think there's some RAs who work with Raj who are going to help me pass these out. So just, you guys can, oh, great, okay. So just hang out for a second, and people will bring you a bicycle drawing. And we may not need the whole crowd. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sure that's plenty for the number of people. Yeah. Okay, so while people are passing out the drawings, I'm just going to go through and explain what the brief is for the project. I think you all know that we were planning to talk here for a little while and then walk across the street to the museum and do something. Well, I'll just talk about what we're doing. So, in addition to thinking of museums as institutions and philosophizing, what I want you to take away more specifically about your relationship with them as an artist is that museums have this capacity to be communities of potential friends, that you can constantly walk across the street and visit the museum and go look at one work or a number of works, and that while you're working as an artist, artworks can be all different kinds of friends to you. They can provide solace or inspiration. You may be needing some detective work. You might simply need a break. It might be like going to see a movie. You just need to get out of your head and go back to it. It might be your banister hiking break. So what I want us to do is we're going to go over to the museum, and Sarah Gans-Blythe has been so wonderful in planning this with me. Sarah has helped coordinate. So when you get there, you will walk in and write down your box number, your P.O. box number, on a page that they'll have. And don't worry if you don't know it, someone can help you. And then you're going to go to your assigned gallery in the museum, and you're going to choose an artwork and take your time. And you're going to draw the picture of the artwork as if it were a portrait of a person. So find something, however you want to interpret it, draw it as a portrait. Spread throughout the museum, there will be stacks of blank postcards and jars of pencils, and you'll be drawing on the postcards. And then when you're done with your drawing, I would ask you to turn the postcard over and write down the most encouraging thing anyone has ever said to you about your art or about being an artist, or what you would hope that they would say, or the pie-in-the-sky version of what you would like that to be in 10 or 20 years. And you can sign it with your name or your box number, or you don't have to if you don't want to. And then we'll signpost it, but either at the exit when you're leaving or in the 5th floor European gallery where there'll be refreshments. We'll have baskets that you can put the cards in. And what I would ask you to do is, on those same sheets where everyone has written their box number, choose someone else's box number, draw a line through it, and then address your card with it. So I'd like it to be something where you all address it as opposed to having us add anything after the fact. So I can repeat all these instructions. There'll be lots of people around to help, but draw an artwork as a portrait, write a note, and then put it in the mail to your classmates. We're divided up into teams just so that it doesn't feel like the airport security line getting into the museum, and so people will be dismissed kind of in batches, and you'll be dismissed according to the color of the bicycle pedal on your drawing. We might need to turn the lights up very slightly, and I'll just tell you that my markers run on the dark side, so if you're thinking, is this red or magenta, it's pink. So finally, just to kind of end on a slightly practical note, if I have one piece of pragmatic advice for you in life, it's that you should try to know people who know the names of artists' pets, because that's what our teams are named after. So I'd like to thank my friend Veronica, who has caucused in the art historical community and come up with a list. So I'll go through all of these because we're all here to learn, and I didn't know any of these pet names. And then after that, we'll go through them again and dismiss people. It's probably better just to go straight to the museum to get started. I don't want to curtail any Q&A, but I'd be more than happy to talk to people or to take any questions if they're pressing at the moment. You guys okay? All right, well, please feel free to catch me or drop me a note at any point. I'd love to have more of a conversation with you about museums or economics or your time here or anything else. So Team Lump, anybody want to guess whose pet that is? Yes? Yes, nice, excellent. This is the purple team. Team Trump, anyone? That would be Hogarth's pug. Team Guinea Pig, unnamed. That would be Kurt Schwitters, and apparently they all lived inside the Mertz ball. Team Fulang Chang, this is the green team. That would be Frida Kahlo's spider monkeys. Team Kornakia. Caravaggio's black poodle. It's the wrong mood, that artwork. Team Poos. I know Sarah Gans-Blythe knows the answer because she made the contribution. That would be Bernard. And look, there's the dog in the painting. Team Puss. Soloit, his cat. Team Sam and Hester. It's Warhol. Apparently all of the cats were named Sam except one named Hester. Team Fayray. Be Wegman. He also had a dog named Man Ray. And final bonus team, if anybody has a blank card, you're in Team Giotto, which is Baldassare. So with that, I'll just say thank you for having me as your speaker. I'm very excited for each and every one of you that you're starting out in your RISD career, and excited to see what you all come up with. So Thanks, guys. Thank you. All right, so from the top, anyone who has a bright blue card, you can make your way across to the museum. And again, please join us for refreshments in the 5th floor European gallery at the end. This one. So just let those guys get a head start. Go ahead and send the next.
Oh, you're doing next team?
Yeah.
Awesome. Love it. So exciting.
I think we'll go ahead and send the purple team too. So if you've got a kind of blue tone purple as opposed to a magenta, this is you.
I'm to officially thank you on behalf of the orientation committee.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure.
So you're going to spend time at the museum?
Yeah. Can I just add, if you guys have any friends who couldn't make the talk for dinner or whatever else who want to join us at the museum, they're totally welcome. So feel free to call or text or email them. We have extra cards. If you have a kind of bluer tone purple, this is you. The redder tone is magenta is the pink team. It'll be fine, but yeah.
You can go on to the next one.
Okay, guinea pig, Kurt Schwitters. Anybody have orange? No? Fulang Chang, who's got the green cards. So there'll be instruction at the museum, but you guys are going to the 6th floor Egyptian and Asian galleries.
Yes, perfect. We are happy people.
Hey, I know. Well, I'm Southernite. It's like I invite 20 people to dinner and cook for 80, so I probably have a similar instinct. Okay, so Team Kornakia, the red team. And quick on your heels, Team Poos. Yeah, I know. If anyone knows what cornacchia means in Italian, please feel free to tell me. All right, Team Puss, the yellow team, you guys. All right, whew, excellent. All right.
We want to see your drawing too, Raj.
Yeah, Raj, seriously. Oh no, Raj, definitely. That's okay. All right, and the lime green, anybody who's Sam and Hester? And turquoise, come on down. All right, great. Thanks, guys.